Welcome to this edition of Workplace Culture Wisdom, a conversation series with experienced leaders. Hello and welcome. I'm here with Fiona Kirkpatrick Parsons, and she is my featured guest today on our Workplace Culture Wisdom series. And Fiona is a reconciliation and inclusion champion. And Fiona, I'm just delighted that you're here today.
I'm thrilled to be here with you, Kathy. I've enjoyed our conversation leading up to this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to sharing and hopefully everyone watching will have something to take away from this today. That's the idea.
That is the idea. We have been talking in a conversation prior to this one about inclusive workplaces and also about what it means for a workplace to be inclusive, and specifically for someone from either an Indigenous or First Nations background. And my question is about inclusive workplace, but also what is the appropriate language to use?
Great questions, both of them. Let's start with the terminology. So Indigenous is really a blanket term, but in the context of Canada, it refers to First Nations peoples, Métis and Inuit. So there are three recognized Indigenous groups in Canada, in what is now known as Canada. And so collectively, we refer to them as Indigenous, if we're saying that. But my personal preference is to be more specific, as in First Nations, Métis, Inuit, but even more specific where the person is from. So if you're speaking to a person, rather than saying, are you Indigenous or are you First Nations? To say, would love to know more, like what your community, what community are you from? I am from Lac La Ronge First Nation and Treaty 6 territory. And so I'd love to share that that's where I'm from. And my identity is Nihilo Esquio, which means a woodland Cree woman. So it's like, here's the equivalent. If you were referred to, say, a person from France as a European, their preference would be to be referred to as a French person versus a European person. So that's kind of the difference. Indigenous is almost like saying European. The first step to people feeling included is to be recognized for who they are, because we are very diverse. When I say we, Indigenous peoples in Canada, even within First Nations, there are over 630 First Nations. And within those nations, many cultures, and I say cultures because there are many, many languages and ways of being and knowing. So there you go. That's a little bit on language. So what does it mean to be inclusive in a workplace? Well, I'd say, like any other people, we want to feel, accepted, respected, safe, and feel like we're being treated equally in the workplace, and having that strong sense of I belong here. There's that sense of community and just acknowledgement of who I am. And it's very, very helpful when you're deliberately setting about to create an inclusive workplace for Indigenous peoples, is to learn about Indigenous peoples. So educating yourself, and there's so much available now. A few years ago, before the word reconciliation entered our vernacular, our language, there wasn't a whole lot. If you're over the age of 22 years old in this country, you did not receive the education that you needed, that you need to fully understand the shared history of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. And that's important, because without that, it's going to be very hard to create an inclusive environment. We come with, when I say we, Indigenous peoples on the whole come with a lot of different life experiences. Some of us grew up in an urban environment. Some of us grew up on reserve or in our home communities, our nations. We have as diverse experiences as you can imagine, so you can't really use sort of a blanket, okay, we are now an inclusive workplace for Indigenous peoples. But where it really starts is education. So that's, when I'm speaking with my clients, that's one of the first things I say is, where are you on that education journey? So that helps me figure out, where they are. How much do they know? And then we can start from there.
This is really amazing. Like there's a wealth of information already in the first few minutes. I just want to say I really appreciate the analogy to Europeans versus the French nation. The work that we started around healthy workplace culture originated with worldviews and worldview intelligence. And worldviews are the lenses through which we see and experience the world. They're different for each of us. And your reminder that not everybody comes from the same experience is really where we go with worldviews. And one of the things we know about the worldviews is that it's about pattern recognition. And so right away, as soon as we use language like Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, people have a worldview about what that means.
Exactly.
And so what you're reminding us is one size doesn't fit all, and not everybody has the same experience. So I like this starting place around what's your level of education already, and then where do we go from there?
Exactly. And I think that it starts from a place of saying, we don't know what we don't know. And that's okay. It's okay to not know, and it's okay to be very transparent about that. But it's not okay not to go forward and educate yourselves. So I think it's an ask us, ask us if we think, if say I'm in an organization already and I am asked, what do you think about our organization in terms of how inclusive it is? First of all, I would want to feel safe sharing that,
Right.
whether it's, in all of its forms. There may be areas that the organization is great at. In fact, I could cite an example of I worked in they deemed themselves a very inclusive workplace. Fortunately, I did feel they were, and I gave them that feedback, but there were things that I felt that they could improve on. And that was well received. So I know my experience isn't common maybe, but I was really fortunate, and I was able to help create some change within the organization, and that was great. So I do have, but I've also worked in workplaces where I felt quite the opposite.
And Fiona, when you're talking about making change in an organization, like what would be some examples of things that would help make a workplace healthier and more inclusive?
I don't know if this is magic, but I'd say it's just listening and giving that sense already that no matter what your people are coming, your team is coming forward with, that it is absolutely safe, what their views are valid, and you want to draw it all out. Like, what are we doing well? On the good days, and where you feel really included, tell me why you felt that way, if you can articulate that. Spend time listening and learning about us. Don't assume and learn about what being an ally truly means. What is allyship? What does that really look like in the Indigenous context? There's plenty of great resources out there. I've just finished a book by an amazing author. I think she's a first-time author named Rose LeMay, and the book is called Ally is a Verb. And she wrote everything in there that I've been talking about for years. I thought, oh, I wish I'd written that book. I'd say for any organization that really wants to do and do something, then there's so many great tips in there. But I'd say, you know what, it's like building any relationship. People feel respect instinctively, and they know when they're being listened to. And so, but I can cite some tangible things that happened as a result of not just me, but other Indigenous peoples in one of my previous employers. We said, look, some of our folks that want to work here or do work here, but are feeling like maybe some things could be better. There are a lot of people, Indigenous people, who want to remain in their community, and that may not be in an urban setting. It may be in a remote place. They would hopefully have access to broadband, would have internet. Some places still don't have reliable. That's a tough one. That's a barrier. But for those that do, can there be more flexible work arrangements rather than this automatic, we're getting all this return to work
Yeah,
demand? now, and I can see why companies do this, but you're going to limit some really talented people from joining. Like you're going to restrict some very talented people from joining your organization.
Yeah, and we know that the ability to provide flexible work arrangements is actually a hallmark of a healthy workplace culture.
And there are other considerations. In some cases, if a person has what is termed Indian status in Canada, it's a terrible word, but that's still a term. I have it. And if a person is in their home community, then they are eligible for some tax reduction. And that's a real consideration because of treaties and their rights, they do have that opportunity. So they should be given that opportunity, right? Especially if you want to attract the best talent. And there is high demand for Indigenous talent right now. We have the fastest growing population in the country. More and more of our young people are getting university educated, getting their degrees, that often very first people in their family ever to get a university degree. And there is a very competitive market for Indigenous people. So you want to make sure, of course, that you have competitive salary and benefits packages and all that. We did something at one of my previous employers that really sent a message. We listened to Indigenous professionals, and rather than have our 3-day bereavement leave, like it's kind of standard across the industry, because many of us would have to say travel for me to get home. It's almost 2 days, really. A full day anyway. Well, we also have 4-day ceremony, like give a sacred fire for 4 days if we're following the traditional ways. You've got to be there for 4 days. You can't leave before that's done. There are certain duties. A person may have a certain stature, like an oldest child in the family would have certain duties. Well, 3 days isn't going to cut it. It's going to make it really hard for them. So what ended up happening is we had 10 days, and that became company-wide for everybody, not just for Indigenous peoples. And also the organization didn't determine who was your immediate family. You could call anyone your family. So that was an amazing shift that benefited everyone at the organization. And honestly, it was super well received. Things like benefits. We had a spending account, personal spending account, a wellness spending account. We included explicitly in the list of services that were eligible. You got your massage therapists and all this. We also had honoraria for elders or for traditional medicines, things like that. Like if you wanted to go and get some sage or whatever, like it was specifically in there. So we were reading this list. We see ourselves. That's inclusion.
Well, these are really great examples, and it also we talk about the fact that the more diverse a workplace, the more everybody benefits. And these examples that you've given just show exactly how that can work.
Absolutely. And when Indigenous, like we talk to each other. We have the moccasin telegraph. So if we know that a company is not doing so well when it comes to inclusion, the word gets out very fast. Your organization will find it very quickly that you're not going to attract the talent that you're looking for. So, the more positives that you have going for you, the more likely you are to attract. So it's a great talent attraction tool if you're very open about these practices in your organization. Even if you were to say, we have begun our learning journey, like we are still in the early stages of learning, but here's what we're doing as an organization. We're educating ourselves by hosting cultural awareness trainings, or we're taking this course. Our senior leadership is doing this. Like that sends a message. And it's not just, words on a page, it's
Right.
actions. And those actions are what matter the most.
And you've just brought up another really important point, which is the role of leadership in creating and championing an
Absolutely.
inclusive workplace.
Leadership and at the board level as well. If you're in an organization with a board of directors, as many are, not only having the board supportive and champions themselves, but if you have Indigenous people on your board, that sends a strong message. It sends a very strong message. And there are very few boards in this country that have Indigenous peoples on their board.
They have some work to do.
Yeah, they have some work to do, but we're getting there. Now, I want to put this in context. I'm in my 60s. I remember back when I was a child, none of what is happening now would have been even a dream. It is, I want to paint a very positive picture. No, we're not there yet, but we are starting. And I'm so grateful to, in my lifetime, see the positive changes that are happening. I think the companies that don't pay attention to what's happening with respect to Indigenous inclusion and reconciliation, they're going to be left behind. We are on the rise.
You mentioned that Indigenous younger people are in high demand. Like, I think to put that in the perspective that you just did, to be able to see that kind of change over the course of your career is really, I think that's heartening, actually.
It is. And I try to remind the young people too, because I don't know if you remember being really young. I know we're both still young, but I wasn't very patient. And so my daughter, who at this time we're having this conversation, is 22. I think sometimes she's a little impatient, but then I remind her, yes, it's good to be impatient because that keeps the pressure on. But the fact is, we're making progress, and it's not a straight line. It's a goat path. You know, it's very zigzaggy. It's not going to be a straight line to the, goal of reconciliation and full inclusion of Indigenous peoples in the workplace. But we are getting there, and I'm very heartened by Canadians. I believe in Canadians. I believe in the goodness of Canadians, and I've seen many examples in corporate Canada where they are working very hard to bring all of this into reality.
Before we get to the end of this call, we've talked a lot about the inclusive part of your signature on LinkedIn, but what about the reconciliation part? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, do we have that kind of time?
We're going to make that kind of time.
Okay. I'm a believer that Canada has such an opportunity to lead the world in this regard. We are on, I always say we're on the brink of great change, but we are in the middle of some great positive change. Yes, we could look at things that are not good. And in fact, if you look at the news, if you ever see anything about Indigenous peoples in the news, it's usually not positive. But the fact is, there's a lot of positive stuff that's going on. Some of the things that I've mentioned about, our peoples are growing, or we have the fastest growing population, so much potential, creating businesses at something like 6 times the rate of non-Indigenous businesses in this country. Most of them started by women, by the way. We're doing great things. And so reconciliation to me is about equity. It's about justice. It's about fairness. And I believe that Canadians at our core, our values, our shared values are all about that. I really do believe that that's who we are. And so reconciliation, as I talk about it in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada when it released its 94 calls to action and its final report in December 2015. So, a decade or so ago, nobody was really paying attention to it at that time, but then things started to shift. And we are seeing in the last, half decade, a great shift in this regard. I'm telling you, the companies that are on that path of reconciliation, doing with real focus and intention, are actually performing better. And there are stats on that from a corporate Canada perspective. I think it was the TSX, the Golden Mail published an index. They do these annual charts, graphs each year, and it was a short while ago they published one, and it showed the performance of companies that were engaged with had strong Indigenous relations programs versus those that didn't, and they actually are performing better. So reconciliation is about doing the right thing. It's about listening, about grappling with the truth, understanding the truth, not just of the past, but of the present, because things are still going on. But it doesn't mean that things can't progress at the same time. And that's what we're doing. And I'm seeing plenty of examples of that happening. I think Canadians can take those of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples that are participating actively in the process of reconciliation, can understand it's not going to be, as I said, a straight path, but it is worth it. We'll be better, and our generations to come will benefit. We are standing on the shoulders of those for good or bad, of those who came before us. we are going to leave a better place for those who come after us. And that's what matters most to me.
I feel that truth, and I feel it when I look at, I have 3 grandchildren, and when I think about them and their future, I, despite the chaos in the world at the moment, I do feel like the world is going to be a better place for them and with them, and because of
Yeah. Yeah, I love the generations, like the young people now. I think they have heart. They're activists. They're born activists now, which means that they're going to hold, those people in power, they're going to hold their feet to the fire. And I think that's a really good and healthy thing. I'm glad that we're doing the work we are right now. I do this work so that generations to come think well of those of us who are participating. But that's a big topic. I could get into specifics, of course, on reconciliation, but I just think big picture, that's what it's all about. It's just creating a better Canada where everyone has the same opportunities to thrive.
That's great. And I'm going to make sure that under the video are there are links to the Truth and Reconciliation work and some of the other things like the research around how much better off companies are when they actually have an inclusive approach to a healthy workplace culture. Are
Yeah.
there any
Right.
last things that you would like to say here before we wind up this episode?
I think it's just at our core, everyone wants to do the right thing, but this isn't just about doing the right thing for humanity as a whole. It's doing the right thing for your business too. Like, let's face it. So it's a smart business decision. It's a smart um, humanitarian decision to do the right thing. And so it's not that complicated. There are steps to take, but I'm really, call me an optimist, but I do believe that most people want to live their lives that way and want to run their companies that way.
Fiona, I really appreciate like all of the wisdom that you've brought to this call today. And I just, even in this short period of time, people who watch this video are going to learn things that they didn't know before. And I want to thank you for answering my request for you to participate in this series.
It's absolutely been my pleasure. There's so much to talk about, but thank you for your interest and yeah, to anybody who sees this and would like to know more, that we have just got the tip of the iceberg here. But I hope it's enough to pique interest and to inspire anybody to take this on, and really work to have that inclusive workplace for everyone.
Fantastic. That would be my hope as well, that there's enough interest sparked that people will do a little bit more or go a little bit further in their own learning journey
Mm.
around what it means to have an inclusive workplace culture. Go to worldviewprograms.com to learn more about our Healthy Workplace Culture program options.